Today's daf we're going to be learning is Chullin daf Samach Dalet. Today's daf is sponsored by Masha and Yisrael Ratman in loving memory of Masha's father, Solomon Maltz, Shlomo Emmanuel ben Yaakov Yitzchak, on his 22nd yahrzeit. He taught us by example what it means to love one's fellow Jew with tolerance, consideration, and kindness. We're going to get started. We have a very practical daf today. Okay, one of the things about Chullin, it might be a lot about the animals and all the details and the birds, but in the end, it's an incredibly practical masechet as opposed to, let's say, the last two masechtot, which we no longer have a temple, so it's not as everyday practical. Today we have a whole bunch of practical, relevant halachot, and we're going to get to, as I mentioned yesterday, the blood in the egg, which there's a shir by Alana Stein-Hain on Din and Daf, and also in the Hebrew side on Sugya B'Ktana. There's also from Dr. Mirav Tubukan, if you want to hear two different approaches, two different shirim. Maybe they say the same thing. I didn't get to listen to both of them. I only heard one. But anyway, it's a very interesting topic with blood and eggs, and we're going to get to all sorts of things like our topic that we started with yesterday. Just a very relevant topic. If you go traveling and, or you go to a store, if you live outside of Israel, and you want to get eggs from a non-Jew, right? How do we know that they're kosher? So we started with this bright that says, no problem, you can buy eggs from a non-Jew, you don't have to worry about. Number one, the issue could be maybe it came from a nevela, a bird that was a nevela, maybe it came from a treifa. The Gemara says, why are you worrying about those, right? And we don't have to worry about them, but the Gemara said, okay, I get you don't have to worry about those, but what about maybe it came from a non-kosher bird? So in the end, we say that we trust a non-Jew, right? We can go to a store and buy a package of eggs because you know that they came from a kosher bird, right? That's where we can go buy eggs where we want, right? It becomes a little more complicated when you're in a third world country and they're just selling eggs on the street, right? You have to figure out where do they come from. So, you can ask and then you can trust them when they say it came from this particular bird, which you know is a kosher bird. That's how you do it. So now the Gemara asks, but wait, aren't there simanim? And if there's simanim, then we could just check the simanim, right? Like, let's take a parallel example. Now, the Braita gave this parallel example, but then changed it. But fish, there's scales and fins. So if you want to go to a market and in a third world country, there's no signs, there's no anything, and you want to just figure out, is it a kosher fish? So you could check. Does it have scales? Does it have fins, right? And you can figure out, there's ways to figure this out. So they say, just like there's simanei beitzim, there's also simanei dagim. So they say simanei dagim, wait, they're the same, but the simanei dagim are scales and fins and scales. So, how can you say that it's the same for the fish, for the birds, for the eggs? To which we answered, kach simanei ulrei dagim. We're talking about fish eggs have the same simanim as eggs of birds. So now we're going to figure out what are those simanim, right? Aren't you curious? How do you tell whether an egg is kosher? Don't get too excited. But Tani gabe bitzim, elohem simanei bitzim, kosher koderet va'al golgolet. Okay, it's rounded, but not exactly rounded. Okay, we're going to see more oval in shape, and not just that, but Rosha echad kad. Koderet is like from kadur, like a ball, which is round. But it's not exactly al gulgolet, means it's not exactly round, it's kind of oval shape. Rosha chad kad v'rosha chad chad. Okay, there's a lot of plays on words here. They're clearly saying this in a way that they want you to remember it. One side is kad, one side is chad. They sound very similar. What they mean is one is rounded like a ball, kad with like a kadur, and one is chad, which is pointy, right? Think about your eggs that you eat. That's the way it is. One side is more rounded, one side is more pointed. Then it's tahora. But if shnei rasha kadim, if the whole thing is round, okay, shnei rasha kadim, or they're both pointed at the top, then at the top and the bottom, then tmeim, then it's not kosher. Chelbon mi bachutz, another sign. Chelbon mi bachutz, v'chelbon mi bifnim tahora. Okay, if the yolk, if the albumen is in the outside and the yolk is in the inside, then it's fine. Like those are our eggs, right? Chalmon mi bachutz v'chalmon mi bifnim, but if it's flipped, then it's tme'ah. Okay, whether there's a reality of this or not, that's a good question. Chalmon v'chalmon mu'ravim ze bazeh. If they're all mixed up together, then biyadua shi beitzat hasheretz. Then that's a different sign. That's a sign of more creepy creatures and reptiles. Okay, they don't. I think from what I read, if I remember correctly, in the Koran, that they don't have. Correct me if I'm wrong, but they don't have two separate parts. It's just one, right? It's all the same in the middle. Okay, so again, whether this is all reality or not, it's a good question. Okay, there's a lot of issues with reality here. But, okay, we're going to read what it says. So now the question becomes, why don't we just check simanim? If I go to a marketplace in a third world country and I don't know where the eggs come from, right? Why do I need to ask, is this from this particular kosher bird? Can I just look at the shape and look at the inside? Well, it's obviously a little hard to look at the inside because you want to buy the egg before you look at the inside, but you can also go by the shape. So they say, lo tzricha de chatuchot. So now they're saying, we're talking about if they're already open, then you won't be able to tell what the shape is because it's already cracked. So then you don't know what the shape is. So they say, okay, but the livdoch, exactly the problem I said when it's not cracked. So how do you tell what's inside? So if it's cracked, livdoch chelbon. So then check the inside, and then you should be able to tell. Bitrufot bakara. What if they're scrambled already? Okay, they're scrambled up, not scrambled eggs, cooked eggs, but you've already beaten them. Okay, now it's a problem. Okay, now where do you have a situation like this, right? On the one hand, you think, okay, no one goes to the shuk and goes to buy, right? No one goes to the marketplace and says, I want to buy, eggs that are already pre-cracked, although nowadays they do sell. I've seen these in America where you buy a carton with pre-cracked eggs. So now there's such a thing, but I think that's pretty recent. But I was thinking, if you go to a place where, let's say you're in a hotel and they're making eggs and you have your own burner, frying pan, all that, and you use their eggs that are already cracked, right, then you would have a situation, okay, something like that, let's say. So anyway, so they say if they're already cracked and mixed, then you won't be able to tell. So now we're going to basically say that that's a possibility. So now we want to understand, again, this is all to understand why you have to ask the non-Jew, and they have to identify which type of bird they came from, and then it's a kosher bird, you can eat them. And you can't check the simanim because there's some sort of situations where you can't check the simanim. They're already cracked, you can't check the shell, and they're already beaten, so you can't check the inside of the egg and what it looks like. To which they say, wait, there's some other problem with that because there is no situation where you're going to get cracked eggs from a non-Jew because we're going to learn that for a different reason it's completely forbidden to buy eggs from a non-Jew that are already cracked, which means that we can't explain the case to be in that case. And then we're stuck back with our question, why don't you just check simanim? Okay? So why is that? It's a somewhat different issue. So, wait, if they're already beaten, how can you buy them? Hatanya, it says in a Braita, you can't sell a treifa to a non-Jew unless, okay, let's say you have an egg that came from a treifa. Now, what normally happens, right? You have an egg that came from a treifa. You can't eat it. So what's the best thing to do? Sell it to a non-Jew. But what's the problem? You can't sell it to a non-Jew because they might sell it back to a Jew. And the Jew won't know that it's a treifa, right? We had situations like this before. If I sell something not kosher to the non-Jew, right? We have this with the treifa, right? Same thing with the beitzah treifa. He'll sell it and no one will know that it's actually an egg from a treifa. So the only way you could do it, they made up this situation, you can sell it to them already beaten. And then, right now, why is that? Because then the rabbis told everybody, don't ever buy beaten eggs from a non-Jew. And then they said, since we're going to forbid you to buy beaten eggs from a non-Jew, therefore, sell your eggs, and it's to help the people to have a financial solution to all their eggs that came from treifa birds. They basically said, look, you can sell them to non-Jews, but no one can buy them from non-Jews because you never know. Maybe they're treifas. Okay, so they say, Lafichach, therefore, since they allowed you to sell your treifas to non-Jews, but only if you crack them already and beat them, then they basically told the Jews, well, you can't buy them from non-Jews because you have to worry that maybe it was from a Jew who sold this treifa egg. So never buy beaten eggs from a non-Jew. So let's go back to our situation now. So if you can't buy them beaten, then you can check the simanim without a problem because you'll never buy them beaten. So you can always check the shape of the egg, or you could check the inside if they're cracked already, whether the yolk and the albumen are in the right place. Ela Amar Rabbi Zera, simanim lav d'oraita. Rabbi Zera explains, these simanim aren't by Torah law, which really means they're not really legit, okay? They're not, well, we're going to see, okay, if they're not, then why they tell us them. But they're not really enough, okay? So, De'ilo temahachi. Now they're going to say, how do we know that these simanim are not by Torah law? And they're not. It's a way of saying here, not by Torah law, they're not really clear-cut simanim. And how do we know that they're not clear-cut simanim? And this is interesting. Because Hada Amar Rav Asi said, on Daf Samach Bet, we just had this, Shmona Sveikotin. There's 8 birds that we don't know what they are, if they're kosher or not. Now, if these simanim work, let's go backwards. If simanim were good, livdok bebitzim didhu. Check the eggs that these birds lay, and check the simanim. If they're kosher simanim, then you know the bird is kosher. So there shouldn't be any safek at all. So from here you see these simanim. Again, not by Torah law, it means more than that. It means, because sometimes they could be by rabbinic law and they're pretty good, but no, they're not really valid. Okay, they're not really good simanim. And then the obvious question is, so then what did they teach us the simanim for if they're not really good? They don't help us, then what are they good for? To which they answer, halakhic. This is the way you should read it. Shnei rashei kadim or shnei rashei chadim, if you have 2, right, the 2 sides are either completely rounded or pointed, chalmon b'chutz v'chalmon b'fnim, or, right, the yolk is on the outside, vadai tme'ah. For sure you know they're not kosher. In other words, it's a clear sign of a not kosher bird. But resheh chad, here comes the play on words. Resheh chad is chad. If chad means pointed, but it also means one. It's like echad. So if resheh chad, one side, is chad, okay, is pointy, and resheh chad, kad, you can hear the play on the words here, and one of the ends, the other end is rounded, v'chalmon b'chutz v'chalmon b'fnim, and you have everything in its right position, v'amar lach shel of ploni v'tahorhu smoch aleha. Then you can trust the non-Jew. In other words, if you go to a shuk in a country where it's not clear what everything is, then first you check the signs, then after you check the signs, then you basically can ask, is this a kosher bird or not? Okay, so that's how it works. So now they say, and what's the reason? De'ika de'orva didame l'diyona. Okay, there's crows that their eggs are the same, they look the same as the pigeons, which is why it's not a sure thing just having the simanim. That's not enough. Okay, so now we figured out what you do when you're in the shuk and you want to get eggs. Okay, now, before we move on, I want to quote you some interesting halakha in the Shulchan Aruch, which I think shows you how kind of things can, the way things develop and what people start doing can affect other things. We'll see in a minute and you'll understand. So when they quote this halakha in the Shulchan Aruch in Yoredei Pevav, so it says very simply, okay, don't sell a beitz and nevela or treifa to a non-Jew because he might sell it to a Jew, right? That's the whole problem. So what do? Right? Beat it in a dish and then sell it to him. Sha'az vaday lo yikneu ta Yisrael mimena, right? Then the Jew's definitely not going to buy it. It's not a problem. But they say, when is this the case? But when can't you buy it? If you see it trufa biyado. Because then we're concerned that the Jew sold it to him because it's a treifa and then you can't buy it. But what you can buy, comes to Shulchan Aruch to say, you can buy pat sheni losh bebeitzim. Okay, now we get to bread. He says this. Now, if you might remember, you're not supposed to buy bread from non-Jews. Pat akum is forbidden. But they permitted it, right, as long as you know it's kosher, okay? But there's a separate issue of a non-Jew preparing bread for you. But you're allowed to buy it under certain conditions, if it's a bakery, if it's not in someone's private, personal bread, and if you really have no other way to get bread, okay? So the Shulchan Aruch says, now, if you have bread that was made with eggs, now the eggs could have been beaten by a Jew, okay? Because, right, they could have been beaten by a Jew, treifa eggs sold to a non-Jew. So Shulchan Aruch says you could buy it anyway. He says, if you live in a place where people do buy this, the Shulchan Aruch thinks that there's this issue, that only issue is if you see it being like beaten. If you don't see it beaten because you buy it and it's in the bread, you don't have to worry that maybe they took beaten eggs that were sold to them. It's only if you see them selling beaten eggs, then you have to worry that why are they selling beaten eggs if not that the Jew gave it to them. But you're not worried that every egg they put in their food could be a beaten egg that was brought from a Jew that was a treifa, which makes sense. But the interesting part is in the Ramah. The Ramah says, okay, those are the Ashkenazi notes on the Shulchan Aruch, which was Sfaradi, Rabbi Yosef Karo, and the Ramah writes the notes on the Shulchan Aruch that are Ashkenazi. Yesh omrim, de'achshav she'ein nisarim mipat shel akum. He says, nowadays that we're not worried about pat akum. We all buy pat akum, he says. Okay, this is in Poland in the late 1500s. We all buy pat akum. By the way, I was in Poland, and the rabbi there said, yeah, he always goes to the store nearby. He checked everything, and he buys all his bread there. There's no kosher bread, so still today. Okay, but now, he said, so nowadays, now here's where reality changes things, okay? Listen to this. Nowadays, that people all eat pat akum, he says, Ein limkor lo'ovei kochavim beitzah asura afilu trufa. Don't sell your treifa eggs to the non-Jew because he might put it in and you have no way of knowing whether he got it as a trufa or not. So he basically becomes more machmir on something that was originally permitted, and he says, don't sell your eggs anymore. Like, we're benefiting from one heter of, okay, now we can eat pat akum, but that creates another problem. Now, obviously, he says, only in a place where people put eggs in their bread. Like, for example, if you live in France and they're baguettes, then you don't have to worry about it because nobody's putting eggs in baguettes. So it's very interesting the way this kind of causes a whole halacha to change because people are now eating bread and it's got eggs mixed in, and then you therefore should stop selling your treifa eggs. So you gain one thing and lose out on something else. You gain that you could buy their bread, but you now can't sell your treifa eggs to them. Okay, anyway, it's an interesting thing about how halacha develops, right, based on things changing. Okay, moving on. So now we have another question. Amar Mar, we're going to go back to this line we said before. Chelbon v'chalmon me'uravim ze bazeh biyadua shi beitzat hasheretz. Okay, if the white of the egg and the yolk of the egg are mixed together, you know that it's a beitzat sheretz. Okay, that comes from a creature or a reptile. So now they're going to say, Lama hilchata. Amar Rav Ukva bar Chama lomar she'im rikma v'nikva b'cha'adasha metameh. Now you might remember there's 8 shratzim that are mitamim. Okay, there's a list in the Torah of these 8 shratzim. We just talked about in the Tin Shamet, that was one of them, that are forbidden, and they're not only forbidden to eat, but also, right, besides all these other shratzim they're forbidden to eat, they also carry impurity. So now they say, if the chalmon and chalmon are mixed together, you know it's a sheretz. So now they say, what is the relevance? So Rav Ukva Chama says, Lomar she'im rikma v'nikva b'cha'adasha metameh. If it already started growing like a chick inside, okay, there was something, not a chick here, but it was growing inside. There's a fetus growing, I don't know what you call it, in the egg, and then an embryo, okay, maybe that's a better word. There was an embryo, and then it opened up, that if it's the size of an adasha, that can already pass on impurity. That's why you need to know this sign of chabon v'chamon uravim ze bazeh. That's why they told you, you know it's a beitzah v'sheretz, because then you know, right, again, you see an egg, you don't know from the outside what it is. Now you know that this actually carries impurity, because if it's a non-kosher bird, there's no impurity. As long as it's the size of a lentil, okay, it has to be the size of a lentil, the embryo, then it will be metameh. Matifla ravina, v'dilma denachashi. Now, I said before, it could be a reptile, also has this issue. It could be a snake. Now, a snake doesn't carry impurity. It's not one of those 8 creeping creatures, so that doesn't make any sense. So, Ella Amar Rava said, fine, it's not that. Rava said, what is it? She'im rikma v'achla, if the embryo is grown and then you eat it, loke ala mishum sheretz hasharetz ala aretz. You're going to get lashes for this pasuk about a sheretz hasharetz ala aretz, because it's either one of the 8, or it's from the reptile family, or it's any one of these creepy crawlers that on the ground that maybe they don't all carry impurity, but yes, it's a lotas, and you're going to get lashes for it. Okay, that's the issue. We want to know, are you going to get lashes? That's why they told you in this Braita that it's a sheretz. So now they say, Hachi, my area ditme'ah, afilu diteoranami. They say, well, then why does it only say a non-kosher bird? Even if it's a kosher bird, then, and if it opens and you see there's an embryo inside, then basically it's forbidden to eat mishum sheretz hasharetz ala aretz, even if it's kosher. How do we know? And even if it's a bird, by the way. Titanya, kol hasheretz hasharetz ala aretz, lirabot, turning out on the bed, efrochim shalom niftechu einehem. If you eat an embryo, okay, or even once it's born, this chick, before it's able to see, okay, in the beginning when it's born, some people claim they can't really see very well for a few hours. until that stage, obviously including in the stage of it being an embryo, it's actually considered a sheretz. You're forbidden based on that pasuk about any sheretz hasharetz ala aretz. Okay, until before you get to that point, so anywhere up into the point where they can see, this chick can see, it's sheretz. So why are you telling us then again? This is a sign that it's a sheretz. Why do I need to know? Either which way, you're going to get lashes. So they say, no, that's not true. Midirabanan ukras machta ba'alma. The fact that they say that an efrach, a chick that's just hatched from a kosher bird that hasn't opened its eyes is forbidden mishum sheretz hasharetz ala aretz, that's just rabbinic, and they just connect it to the verse. It's not actually forbidden by Torah law, so you won't actually get lashes. So now we go back and explain. So that sentence in the Braita that said the chelbon and the chelbon mu'uravim ze bezeh biyado shi beitzat hasheretz. What it means is not that it carries impurity, right? But what it means is you're going to get lashes on account of that pasuk if you were to eat that embryo inside. Okay, and it wouldn't be true for a kosher one because even though it's forbidden, it's only forbidden by rabbinic law. Okay, now we're finally getting to the eggs, the blood in the eggs. Tanu Rabbanan, giulei beitzim mutarot. Okay, we're not yet up to it. We have 3 halachot in this Braita. The first is giulei beitzim, which is a big machlok at what it is, but we'll go with Rashi. Rashi says it's a non-kosher egg that's mixed up with kosher eggs. Okay, assuming, I want to understand, you have to identify the non-kosher one and take it out, although, I don't know, maybe even by Dinei Rov, but maybe not because it's actually a whole thing, so probably not. So, assuming you can identify it, let's say it's shaped differently, so you can take it out. Let's say you have all these hard-boiled eggs, and you cook them all together. By the way, there's a machloket. Are we talking about when they're hard-boiled? Or is it even if they're cracked and mixed up together, and then maybe bato b'shishim? Okay? But we're going to see that they're mutarot. So either you could say they're cracked open, and then 1 in 60 they'd be batel, or if they're all cooked together, and they're with their klipa on, their shells. Remember we talked about how eggs don't give taste? So, as long as you identify and take out the non-kosher egg, you can eat the rest because they don't impart taste, because remember, the water of eggs has no taste. So, again, there's this machloket. Is it with the shell? Is it without the shell? Some people think even with the shell, it does impart taste. There's all these different opinions about how to understand this. Some people think this isn't even talking about cooking eggs kosher or non-kosher together. It's talking about something else. But we'll leave it at Rashi. Beitzim muzarot nefesh yafeh tochlem. Okay. Some people say it's muzarot. Some people say it's mozrot. There's different interpretations of what this means. According to, again, some commentaries, it seems that, so Rashi, first of all, points out we're talking about not fertilized eggs. There's no efroch kalu behem la'olam, right? It's not from a zachal, right? There's different kinds of eggs. Unfertilized eggs, we're talking about unfertilized eggs. But what other commentaries say that these are eggs that the hen sat on for a long time and they kind of got a little ruined. Like they're kind of disgusting. And that's why they say nefesh yafeh tochlei. What they mean is someone who's not a little disgusted by food, right? Someone who's not particular and say, ooh, that's disgusting, right? So if you're not like that, then you can eat them, okay? There's no problem to eat them. Okay, why they're telling us this is a good question. Like what's the halakhic element here? But I guess they're telling you that they're fine as if they're unfertilized eggs. Now we seem to be going back to fertilized eggs, although there's a bit of a debate about that as well. Nimtza aleha koretam, if you find some blood in the egg, okay? Rashi says, Hu zera shel ternigol kashur berosh hakad shel habetza. In the side where it's rounded in the egg, that's where the embryo grows. And if you find some blood there, what do? Zorek et hadam ve'ochel et hasha'ar. You eat the blood, you take out the blood, and you can eat the rest of the egg. Okay, you don't have to throw out the whole egg. Okay, you could just take out the blood. But Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, v'hu shenimtza al kesher shala. It has to be found on the kesher, which most people say is this stringy part that's like a thick, stringy part that basically is where they claim that's where it grows from. Okay, where the fetus grows from, and it's this kind of stringy part that's part of the white of the egg. Okay, so now. Tani dostai avua de Rabbi Aptoriki lo shanu ela shenimtza a chelbon shala. Okay, it has to be in the white part of the egg. Aval nimtza chalmon shala. But if it's in the yolk, afilu beitza asura. Now he claims if it's in that white part and it's right where on the kesher where we assume that's where the fetus is growing, then we assume the blood is the chick basically, and it's a loss of life, right? That's the blood that we can't eat. But if it's spread out and it's all in the yolk of the egg, then we're going to have a problem, because then it seems like it extended into the whole egg, and it's a problem. Okay? Now, we're going to see that, right, and why do they say my taima? Deshada tichla bekula, because it spread, well, once the blood is somewhere else and not in its place where it's supposed to be, then obviously something went off and it's everywhere. Okay, and then you have to throw out the whole egg. But Amrle Rav Gavia mi Beit Ktil le Rav Ashi. A different Tana brought the actual opposite. That if it's in the yolk, it's actually fine. You just have to throw out the blood. Okay? And the rest is fine. If it's specifically in the kesher, that part we were talking about, then you have to throw out the whole thing. But Abaye fixed that version when he heard someone say it to the version that we started with. Okay, so the first thing to note is that there's different versions, whether you have to throw out the whole egg or you don't have to throw out the whole egg. Okay, and the other thing is they seem to be talking about fertilized eggs. Nowadays, there's no fertilized eggs. Like, we don't have fertilized eggs in the shuk, and therefore the question is how to treat blood in our day. Okay, the first thing I just want to read. Okay, if you want to know more details about this, you can listen to Alana's shiur. She quotes all different halakhic authorities and different approaches that have been, but I do want to mention one part here in class, which is in the Shulchan Aruch. So it starts off Dam Beit Sim. If you know it's mirokam efroach. Okay, I'm in Yordei Samachvav. Before we were in Pevav, which is 86. Now we're in 66. If you want to look it up. So if you know that it's from a fertilized egg, chayavim alav afilu im eino yodea shu mirokam efroach. Avalim eino yadua shu mirokam efroach en chayavin alav. Okay, in other words, you're only chayav according to Shulchan Aruch if you know it comes from an embryo. If you don't know it comes from an embryo or from a fertilized egg, then you're not chayav. But the rabbis forbade it anyway. Okay, the other thing that if you listen to Alana's shiur, you'll hear that there's Gemara in Kritu, which basically says, or maybe it's a Mishnah, I forget. It's on the source that there's no blood. The whole question is this coming from blood of something that was a live thing, right? And it's from lo tuchlu al adam, don't eat blood, and therefore you can't eat the blood here because it's from something live. But there they actually say there's no such law by eggs. Okay, the blood is blood of animals, not of eggs. Okay, it's not a problem in eggs. And therefore, the truth is like, well, whatever. But basically, it seems like there's a contradiction here between sugyot, and then there's different ways of reconciling it. And that's why they say if it's, from a fertilized egg, yes. It's not. That could be a one way to see it. Anyway, there's a lot there. You can listen to the shiur. But nimtza le'at koret dam. I'm continuing in the Shulchan Aruch. Zoreket adam ve'ochelet hashar. Okay, you can throw the rest. Shulchan Aruch paskins, no problem. Just throw out the rest, as long as it's in the chelbon, the white part of the egg. Avalim nimtza b'chelmon kol ha'beitzah asura. Okay, if it's in the yolk, the whole thing is forbidden. But the Ramah adds here, and here are these big chumras that Ashkenazim hold by, and it all comes from the Ramah. So this is why I just like to once in a while get practical. יש אומרים דאם נמצא קשר החלבון וגם מבחוץ, דהיינו שנתפשט מן הקשר דכל הביצה אסורה. Some people say if it's on the kesher, where we saw in the Gemara, it's not a problem, right? Just throw out the blood. It says no. Some people say the kesher or in the white, it's a problem. The whole egg has to be thrown out. Now that's if you hold by the reverse girsa, because the Gemara suggested there were two versions, even though it seemed to pretty much hold by the other version, because he even said Nabai corrected him, which sounds like it wasn't the right version. But some people still hold that and think the whole egg is forbidden. Okay? And then he even writes in the parentheses here in the Rabbeinu Yerucham says, Yesh lachmir kashtei ashitot. Okay, you should be machmir in both directions. V'yesh machmirim od dekol shenimtza al hakesher shel hachabon afilu lo nitpashet klal asur. Right? Some people said not even if it didn't spread at all from there, if it's just in the kesher, it's forbidden. And mizeh nitpashet haminhag b'midinot elu, and from here, and he testifies to the fact that this is a widespread custom in all our midinot, that le'asur kol beitzah sheyesh badam, any egg that has dam, the whole thing, and there's no distinction between chabon and chamon. And when there are no agim la'akel, lizrok adam u'la'atir beitzah, b'mkom shem demutal, tzarich litol kedei klipa im adam kishazorko. He then goes far to say, even those who don't hold by this chumrah, still if you're going to throw out the blood, take away a little bit more. Okay? Don't just throw out the blood, take away the area surrounding it. Okay? However, they seem to be talking about fertilized eggs. And when we don't have fertilized eggs, that becomes a question. So why, right? How do we treat the blood in unfertilized eggs? And there's a lot to be written about that. So with that, I'm going to leave you with some ideas, and we're going to move on to our last sugya for today. Amar Chizkiah, minay lebeitzat me'ah sheyasura min haTorah, shenemar ve'et bat hayena. So now they say, an interesting source. How do we know that eggs, okay, we started with the simanim of beitzim, right? And to know eggs. Where do we even get that that you can't eat an egg from a non-kosher bird? Eggs are not the bird, right? Maybe it's okay to eat them. So how do we know that you can't? Because in the list of non-kosher birds, it lists the bat haye'ena. Okay, it's actually read as bat haya'ana, but usually we call them ye'enim, okay, which is from the ostrich family. Now, where do we get it from there? Well, they say, "V'chibat yesh la liyana." Does the ye'ena have a daughter? Okay, now first of all, yeah, why doesn't it? Okay, that's a good question. What does this question mean? Some people read this question. I think that seems to be the best way to read this question. It's that why would it list the daughter of a ye'ena? If the ye'ena is forbidden, then the daughter of the ye'ena is forbidden. So it just should have said ye'ena, and you would know that the daughter of a ye'ena is forbidden. So why was it telling you daughter of a ye'ena instead of saying a ye'ena? So to say, ela ezo zo beitzat me'ah, it's trying to allude to the fact that it tells you two things in one. One is a ye'ena is not a kosher bird. Number two, the egg that comes from the ye'ena and from any other kosher bird is forbidden. And that's where they get it from bat haye'ena. Well, the Gemara is not going to be so happy with this. The Gemara is going to say, V'dilma haynu shmayu. Maybe a ye'ena is called a bat ye'ena. Maybe that's just the name of the bird. Okay? So maybe that's what they call ye'enim in general. So they're going to say, and then you can't learn anything from here. No, it doesn't seem that way. We're going to see psukim where it talks about ye'enim and not benot ye'enim, okay? Bat amilach zal, ki ye'enim bamidbar. Like ye'enim in the desert, so here you see, ye'enim is the name of the bird, and not bat ye'ena. Velo, wait, but is that really so? V'haktiv ese mispeid kitanim, ve'evel ki benot ye'ena. Now, if you say benot ye'ena is the egg, so now we have a problem. This pasuk says, okay, this is a pasuk in Micha. I'm gonna mourn about the following things and mourn, lament, and sing and cry out these hespedim and eulogize and all that. I'm gonna eulogize like a tanim, and I'm gonna do mourning like the benot ye'ena, because they sing, they make these loud shrill noises of like people in mourning. Now, do eggs, if benot ye'ena are eggs, do eggs make sounds? No, not last I checked. So how can you possibly say that bat ye'ena and our pasuk is an egg when bat ye'ena here clearly means the birds? So they say no, it really means when it says benot ye'ena, the daughters of ye'ena, what it means is ki ye'ena zo shemitabelet al baneha. It means like the ye'ena that is mourning for her children. Okay, and some people even say children means eggs of like the eggs that never hatched or something like that. Okay, now, va'aktiv v'shachnu sham benot ye'ena. Okay, they keep quoting psukim, but they dwell there, the benot ye'ena. The benot ye'ena dwelled there. Okay, eggs don't dwell. You wouldn't say the egg dwelled. You would talk about a bird who dwelled. Ki ye'ena zo sheshochenet im baneha. Again, these translated as the ye'ena that dwells there with her offspring. Okay, v'haktiv, another one, techabdeni chayat hasadeh tanim ubenot ye'ena. Okay, you will show me glory or respect, meaning you will sing to me like the birds do. Okay, like the singing of the benot ye'ena, which are birds and not eggs. Isak datach beitza bat memar shirahi. Right? If you think it's an egg, what, an egg sings? No, definitely not. So we've basically proven that benot ye'ena in the Torah clearly means birds and not eggs. So how do we go back to our pasuk and learn from their eggs? So now they're going to say something which is not going to be fully clear till we get to tomorrow's daf, but last line for today, elektiv hayana, uktiv bat hayana. Okay, there's two words here. There's hayana and there's bat hayana. Vishane, in other words, and in some places it says yana, some places it says in the Torah bat yana. Okay, there's different, right? So sometimes they're called the daughters of, sometimes they're called the yana. But shane hacha, this particular pasuk, the bat yana in our pasuk is unique because the pasak sifra l'shtei tevot. Okay, there's rules for the sofrim. We're going to learn halacha from the rules that the scribes have when they're writing the Torah. When you're writing these words in the Torah, the rule is pasak sifra l'shtei tevot. He has to separate bat from hayana. They have to be two separate words. The fact that they have to split, you can't put the bat next to the yana. Okay, what does that mean? That's a good question. Every time bat yana, it's two separate words. So we're going to have to explain this a little bit better, okay? There's some rule, which we'll learn tomorrow, or you might learn it today, because stuff will go up soon. But basically, there's some rule about separating. It's particularly relevant in this reference to the bat yana, about separating the two words, which is an indicator that it's referring to two things. One is the yana, and the second is the bat yana, which means the egg. Okay, so in this unique case, we're going to learn bat yana as egg, even though in other places it doesn't mean it. And again, this is going to teach us about all eggs from non-kosher birds are not kosher. And with that, we finish our daf. So, a little bit in the middle without fully understanding, but luckily it's a Friday, Shabbos stuff will be up, and you can, if you're really, really curious, you can listen soon. So what did we do today? We started with the simanei beitzim, and we said, basically asked a question. Why, if you can trust a non-Jew to tell you it's from this bird, right, why do you need them to tell you? Why don't you just check the simanim? And in the end, we said the simanim are not enough. Simanim are a good way to eliminate what's not kosher, okay? But to know what is kosher, you need a combination. For it to look like a kosher egg and for the non-Jew to then tell you it comes from a kosher bird. Then we got to we had the sidetrack because we talked about one of the simanim was the chelbon and chalmon are mixed. It's like a sheretz. Why do we have to know it's like a sheretz? What's that going to teach you? In the end, we said it's that you're going to get lashes on it. Okay, lashes for eating a sheretz. Then we moved to this. There were these other two halachot, but the main thing was about the blood and the egg. And what's it a sign of, right? The rabbi saw it as a sign of an embryo, and therefore said that blood is forbidden. And like I said, a lot more there. You can listen to Alana or Meirav Tubakana's shiur on it. And from there we got to, and then we had this whole machloket or two versions. Which part of the egg does it mean you have to just get rid of the blood? And for which part of the egg do you have to actually not eat any part of the egg? And then we saw the halacha in the Shulchan Aruch, where in the Ramah anyway, in the Ashkenazi custom was to go l'chumrah on both those issues. And then we moved to Chizkiah, who said, what's the source for the fact that an egg from a non-kosher bird is forbidden to eat? And that we learned from this reference to the bat yana, which in the end wasn't because it says bat yana only, but also because of the rules to the sofrim, which is interesting, that right to the scribes' rules that affected how we can darshan something based on that, which makes sense because these are all traditions, right? It's all based on tradition. So the tradition of them splitting the word was also led to this tradition of that's the source for the eggs from non-kosher birds. And with that, we finished for today. Today was a little bit more practical, and got into a lot of practical halachot, like especially if you're traveling, between the bread and the eggs and all that. Good for summer vacation if anyone's going away. Wishing everyone a good day.